Was Jerry Reinsdorf eager to talk and set a record straight, Ramona? Did you sense when you spoke to him?
Yeah, he kind of was. Yeah, it was interesting. Like, when I first started to talk to him, like, he had clearly thought about what he wanted to say. It was, he had watched the whole series and he had, kind of had his own thoughts on the matter. And like the first thing that came out of his mouth was like, can there be any doubt that Michael Jordan is the greatest player of all time? Like that was the first thing he wanted to, and he went on quite a while about that. And I think that's what a lot of us sort of felt after watching it. Right. And then, the second part, which I had, I really pressed him on, which was, well, look, why did it have to end? Why did this have to be the last dance? As you watch this, it's obvious that so many of their problems were just internal, that there was a couple of easy solves, which, just fire the general manager. That's the guy who's causing the problems, right? And I think what Reinsdorf's point is like, he pointed out to me that he did try to get him back together at the end. He went to Michael in July, and he said, Michael, don't say anything yet. We're in the middle of a lockout, let me see if I can get Phil. And he went back to Phil one or two more times and still tried to get him to come back around. But I think by that point it was probably too late. I think, when you play the whole season and it's the last dance and you say your goodbyes and like too much blood has been spilled, it was an ugly year. Like it was probably too late for a Hail Mary, right? But were there times earlier that they could have changed things, that they could have changed history? And I think there were, but I don't know if it really would have worked, right? I think that team was getting older. I think, and Jerry's point, which is a good one, is that, a lot of those players were, they didn't really do much after that year. Like Luke Longley went to Phoenix and that didn't go well. And Dennis Rodman played like 35 more games. And Scottie Pippen, he got paid, but he certainly wasn't the same Scottie Pippen after he left Chicago. He had a history of injuries. Steve Kerr, Judd Bushler, those guys moved on. Like they're really, it was going to be hard to keep that team together at that level. And I think Reinsdorf's words were like, Michael really had to carry them.
No
that
doubt.
Last year they were gassed. That look, we just saw how those efforts were against the Pacers and the Utah Jazz. Like, I mean, they barely won that year, and it doesn't mean that they wouldn't have won again, but. Sometimes you have to like look at something and say like, this was coming to an end.
I know. I remember sitting on the SportsCenter set. We were all wondering how the hell is this really going to end? Would they really let this thing lapse? Essentially, is what the concept is. And I understand that a lot of these guys didn't do very much. Although Kerr did win a championship in the next year with the Spurs in the shortened season.
Right.
I understand that they didn't do very much from there on out. But this was all about having one of the greatest rock and roll, if you will, tours in the history of sports.
Yeah.
And running it back just for the mere sense of just you got to see what you have. And part of the reason why it would have been so difficult is obviously Pippen and Phil having their issues with Jerry Krause, who it appeared Reinsdorf let do what he wanted to do. So does Reinsdorf accept any, if you will, responsibility for any of this, do you think?
Not really. I didn't get that from him. Like I pressed, right? Like I asked the question a couple of different ways and a couple of different, and part of me is like, I think this is just his style. I think he basically said he went to Jerry and said, knock it off. You guys are winning. Why did you say that 82-0 comment? He went to Phil and said, hey, you and Krause, this is a mismatch. Just let this go, Like he kind of wanted them to solve their problem. And I'm always looking at it from sort of a modern viewpoint, which is like, dude, you're the owner. Like, just choose between them. And I said, why didn't you choose between them? Because in this case, like, not making that decision was making a decision, right? Like, sometimes when like, I tend to be a little bit indecisive when I'm, like, scheduling things, right? Like, I'm not sure. Let me see. I'll see in a couple of days. And a lot of it is just, like, it's my own personality, but it's somewhat like my job too. Like something might come up and I have a better idea, like literally the day of, as opposed to 4 days out, right? And I think Reinsdorf is the same way. I think he just didn't want to swing the hammer. I think he didn't want to have to choose between them, so he just simply didn't. and he told them to work it out. He tried to help them work it out. He tried to be the middleman, tried to sort of force the issue. He basically told Phil, like, who cares about Krause? Just go over his head. Come straight to me if you have an issue. Like, why can't you work through this, right? And, you know, at some point when you don't make a decision, the decision is made for you. And that's the story of the Bulls.
Hey, you watched all the way to the end. Thanks for that. Watch more right here.